Good evening and welcome everyone to this week's episode of The Career Climb. If this is your first time watching, The Career Climb is where we spark conversations with executives, industry leaders, and this is where they share their perspectives on leadership and workplace culture through real life cases, not just theory. We don't do just hypotheticals around here. And I'm so excited for you to meet tonight's guest. I'll introduce him in a second. But if you and I have never met, I'm your host, Julia Rock, founder and CEO at Rock Career Development. We're a Houston-based consulting firm that helps organizations to retain their best talent and get the best out of them through leadership transformation. Research shows the high correlation between manager behavior and employee engagement. So that's where my team and that's where we focus. And so we are excited to get into tonight's conversation. But if you want to catch up on past episodes and seasons of The Career Climb, you can connect with me here on LinkedIn, or you can visit rockcareer.com/archive and /CC archive, to view the YouTube playlist. And as always, I would love for you to interact with us tonight here in the chat. The comment section over the past few episodes has been very, very active. So I want to keep that momentum going. Let me know where you're calling in from or watching from, any leadership lessons that you want to share, any questions you would want to ask me or my guest, Sean. Drop them so that we can answer your questions. But enough of the preamble, enough of the conversation. I want to go ahead and introduce you to tonight's special guest. Let me go ahead and bring him up. And we have Sean Hogue with us, who's the Executive Vice President at Baker Marine Solutions, LLC, and he's a maritime sector veteran. And he's here to talk with us tonight about courage and fearlessness in leadership, which is a conversation that I don't think gets nearly enough airtime. So excited to have you here with me, Sean. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Julia. Very, very nice to be here. Welcome to my hotel room studio.
Yes, it's we love the digs. We love the digs. And so for the folks who are listening, Sean, I want to make sure I gave a little bit about you, but would love for you to introduce yourself to the viewers.
Sure. So my name's Sean Hogue. I'm a master mariner, a ship's captain. I worked offshore in the energy sector, upstream oil and gas for about 15 years, and from Canada, moved down to Houston about 10 years ago. Started doing shoreside marine assurance in the energy sector, and then over the years progressed into an executive role, and now I work with a team of people that does all this great work out in the industry.
Man, thank you so much for that. And we met on, was it Threads or Twitter, or I feel like we met on through social media.
It was absolutely through social media, yeah, on one of those.
And I'm so glad I had a chance to connect with you and follow you, given the fact that I've also got a background in energy, not necessarily doing the ship stuff. I was on the finance side. I was inside the building. But I feel like we share a lot of similar principles when it comes to leadership. And so speaking about that, what comes to your mind, Sean, let's hop into it here. What comes to your mind when you hear the words courage and fearlessness in leadership?
I think the first thing that pops to mind immediately is kind of balancing confidence and in your capabilities with humility in what you know and kind of what your understanding of the situation is. It's very much, to me, leadership or fearless leadership. It's very much about truth telling. It's about being direct, not letting things linger, and having the courage to have those hard conversations as early as they need to be had.
And I think that that's the piece that we don't talk nearly enough about, is the idea that you have to be willing to tell the truth, even if it hurts, even if it's painful, right? I think sometimes when we talk about like empathy and emotional intelligence and other things, we use that as a way to not really tell the full truth because you're trying to be considerate of someone's feelings or emotions. And so I really appreciate the idea of when you're a fearless leader, you tell the truth, even if it hurts. So appreciate.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. And I think, but I think that empathy is incredibly important,
Absolutely.
right? because it's not something you need to make personal, right? A direct conversation or a hard conversation, it shouldn't be personal, but it becomes personal, to everybody. So yeah, you have to approach it in the right way. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so to that end, kind of a good segue there. So what do you think more leaders, and particularly the executives, so folks who are at your level and in the C-suite, what do you think that they need to know about being fearless in leadership?
Um, I, I think it helps to have some triggers to spur you into action. And so I've got a concept and I call it fast feedback. And basically what that means is as soon as I see something that I feel like it needs to be addressed, no matter how large or how small, then I try to get right to it. Right. Um, but I think the way that you communicate these things is incredibly important. And so you really need to consider the timing of your messaging, the tone of the conversation, and then the method of delivery. Because the more important the message, the more personal it really has to be, right? So if it's a very hard conversation with somebody, your best case is to do it in person. Um, we all do a lot of video calls these days, which is a pretty good proxy for it. But nothing beats a face-to-face conversation when you need to have it, and you certainly don't want to deliver terrible news over email.
And that it's funny you mentioned that, because that was going to be my follow-up question, kind of curveball here, is that when we think about some of these tough conversations that CEOs and other executives have, you hear about the email memo that went out, or there was some Zoom call where they give this terrible news, and it's like, well, is this the best way we could have done this? Was there no type of setting or forum or smaller conversation that we could have had? And so just wanted to hear your thoughts on whether it's layoffs or company restructurings. I feel like we've gotten a little heavy handed with the able memos when these should be probably more personal conversations.
I think when you're in a very large organization, there's obviously some logistical issues with how you do these things. Um, and I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but obviously there's been some of the Zoom layoffs in the news, or the email. An entire department gets laid off in one fell swoop. But we've seen examples of better ways to do it as well. Host a town hall, bring everybody in, answer their questions, and ultimately be available to be accountable as well, and take responsibility for making that hard decision.
And I think that part that you said at the end there around being available to be accountable, right? When you do things via email, or it's a quick Zoom call and then you hit end, right? You're not really there for questions to be held accountable, for
Yeah.
someone to push you or challenge you. So really appreciate that thought. And so we want to get into the case study, but before we do, I wanted to ask you, is there an experience that you would like to share with the viewers, where you've had to demonstrate that kind of courage, where you've had to make that tough call? I know the case study will probably hit on this a little bit for some of your experience, but just any situation that you want to highlight.
Um, I mean, anytime you have to let somebody go is always incredibly hard. It's always a very hard conversation. So I think how you approach that really speaks volumes about your, I don't know, philosophy as a leader, I guess. But ultimately, when you come to a decision like that, you have to remember that really a core job of leadership is to protect your people, right?
Mm.
And a lot of protecting them is kind of standing as a shield to take the slings and arrows that they don't have to, and so ultimately hopefully free them up to be able to do their best work without all this stuff on the side. But another piece to that, to protecting your people, is protecting the whole sometimes in favor of the individual, because if that individual is pulling the team down, then really it's your obligation to have that hard conversation, or to make that that hard decision.
Yeah, and I appreciate that idea around, even though you want to make sure that you're approaching things the right way, you still have to think about the team and the organization as a whole. So if you
Yeah.
have someone who is bringing the team down, as much as you want to, not hurt the person or hurt their feelings, you have to think about, what does this mean for everyone overall? And you may have to make that tough decision. So thank you for sharing that. And we've got Deborah, who is calling in from Arlington, Virginia. Welcome, Deborah. And so for those of you who are listening, we're about to get into the case study. So you can grab your pen and paper if you want to take some of the notes to hear what we're talking about. And you can also just come into the chat and let us know where you're watching us from. And if you have any questions for myself or Sean, we want to make sure that we get to those. So, all right, Sean. So let's hop into the meat and potatoes here. Let's hop into the meat and potatoes. So for the viewers, the case study we're dealing with is for a global maritime shipping company. So we have Lisa, who is the chief operating officer of Morgan & Co., which is the shipping company. And they sell across international trade routes. They transport goods, and they've got about 50 cargo ships. The problem that they now have is that there was a safety audit that then highlighted major maintenance issues with the 50 cargo ships. And even though nothing has happened in terms of loss of life or accidents just yet, the audit highlights that if they keep things going and they don't address the maintenance problems, they could have some environmental issues, mechanical failures, or something even more fatal. So the question then becomes, well, how do we handle this, knowing that we have to continue to transport goods and do the work? So the solution that's on paper is that they would have to take 15 of the 50 ships out of service for several months, which means that would disrupt their operations and cut their revenue by 25%. So Lisa's got a big problem on her hands here. And she's got a lot of opposition from her CFO, who's worried about the financials. The CEO is worried about shareholders. Customers are frustrated. Employees are worried about their jobs. So there's a lot of angst around, if we take these ships offline, these are all the things that could happen from an external perspective, as well as the employees being worried about their jobs. So now, so we're going to ask Sean, Lisa's in this kind of conundrum now. She has one option where she doesn't do the maintenance and she just hopes for the best, or she takes those 15 ships out of service and she deals with all the backlash and all the risk of the revenue loss, customer issues, employee issues, etc. So knowing what we know now, I feel like everyone who's listening is going to say, well, just take option 2, right? You know that it's a safety thing, but I feel like that's easier said than done. So let me ask you, Sean, knowing that what Lisa is dealing with, what would you do in Lisa's position, or if you've been in a similar situation?
Well, I've never been like a fleet manager or anything of that nature, but it's pretty common, right? This situation, it's pretty common. We work in marine assurance, so we do vessel vetting and inspection, and you'd be amazed what you see out there. But the case study actually reminds me of a company that I used to work for, who is no longer with us. And a big part of the reason that they're no longer with us is because over the years, they essentially ran these ships into the ground and didn't spend really a lot of money on maintenance, and certainly made no plans for replacing the fleet over time, right? And so ultimately you can see where this road leads if you don't do anything.
Right.
What I would do in that situation, it's a little bit trickier. Obviously, taking your entire fleet out of operation for a period of months is going to shut the company down, right? You're probably going to bankrupt yourself at that stage too. So I think probably the best advice lies somewhere in the middle, like most things. I think, like we work in risk mitigation, right? So you think about the business risk, the reputational risk, all these different things that might take place, and I think largely you would want to stagger taking these things out of commission and do that kind of on a regional basis. Assess which is your most profitable lines, or use some kind of metric to help you make the decision like that, so that you can keep people working, you can keep everything working, and then while you roll the ships through that period, I think would probably be where I would start with it.
And so I appreciate the idea of being strategic with it, right? It doesn't have to be the entire sky is falling. So,
Sure.
so let's talk about the courage though that Lisa would have to demonstrate here, right? Because even taking the 15 of the ships offline like they're being asked to do, it's going to cause revenue losses. Her CFO feels like the hair is on fire. The CEO feels like their hair is on fire. She's got all this opposition. So how can she really kind of communicate this idea and really show courage? It's one thing to say, "Hey, I know what to do." But it's another thing to actually have the courage to go forth and communicate this with the people who feel like they have their hair on fire.
Stakeholder management is incredibly important, and there's a lot of stakeholders in this one. Ultimately, it kind of comes back to my opening statement about you need to be direct, but you also need to be very clear on your message before you present a hard message like that. Personally, I always kind of start and I do a bit of a whiteboarding session with myself, and I write it down, and I really try to get to the root of what it is that we're actually speaking about here, so that you can make as succinct an argument as possible, and then have the receipts to back it up, right? So in this case, it comes down to being direct then, right? It's once you have your argument crafted and you've thought about it, maybe you back and forthed it with a trusted advisor to go in and have that hard conversation, then you've got to go in, see something, say something, fast feedback. I think in this case, in that kind of corporate environment, a lot of that would really depend on what your relationship is with these different people. Lisa's the COO, right? It's a powerful position, and she's in charge of operations, and she's there for a reason. So you would hope that the CEO would listen to her, and I would probably start by hopefully gaining a supporter there, and then kind of moving down the line. When it comes to the greater company, kind of the town hall concept, like we said, just you got to let everybody know. I think truth telling and leadership is important, and at the end of the day, it doesn't do you a lot of favors to hold all kinds of things back from the stakeholders that need that information so that they can understand where you're coming from, right? So there's a rapport building piece to this, and to get people on side with a hard decision, they need to understand the entire picture, because ultimately in this case, no matter which option you take, it seems like a bunch of people could lose their jobs, right? You could lose the contracts. Now you don't need all these people, but when you push that further down the line, now you've got vessels out there sinking, and you've got lawsuits, and you've got loss of life, which you have an obligation to protect in this industry, and the end result gets infinitely worse, right? So it's, I think, the best decision of two bad options.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much good in what you just shared just now, especially around when you're talking to the broader organization. I think what happens sometimes in leadership roles, especially when it gets into senior leadership, they think that they're shielding the employees by not telling them anything, right? Like, oh, we're keeping them safe, we're handling the issues, but then the employees find out at the last minute, and it's like, well, wait a minute, why didn't we know before? And typically your employees, they just want to know what's going on, right? At least if they have enough information, they can then make decisions for themselves. Do they need to find new employment? Do they have to make other plans? They have the opportunity to think for themselves versus, it's the 11th hour now, and it's like, oh yeah, by the way, we're going to take all these ships offline and all of you are going to lose your jobs. And it's like, well, when did you find that out? Why weren't we made aware?
No, absolutely. But if you lead from the front on the communication piece, then you can also help craft the narrative, right? And at least if everybody gets angry on the backside, at least you've had the chance or the opportunity to state what your true intentions are, and hopefully create a compelling message that gets through to people and get them on side right from the beginning.
And I hope the folks who are listening, I hope that you're taking the notes here, that Sean is giving us a lot of good information here. If you're dealing with something like this, something major in your organization, there's some big change that's coming, thinking about the way to communicate the message can help you with demonstrating the level of courage that's required. Plan ahead. Don't wait to the last minute and then feel like you have to go and just hope for the best when you go and talk to your employees. Think about what the impacts may be and get out in front of the message early. And I want to go back to something else that you said, Sean. You talked a little bit about the relationships between, say, the other executives and leaders, and how that can play into being able to share tough messages. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll move on?
When you're confronted with a problem and there's kind of an interpersonal aspect to it, I think you always have to start and consider, what is my relationship with this person or with this group? You know, if you're having an issue with one of your vendors or their manufacturing provider, and you think, man, these guys can never get anything right. We're never getting anything on time. What's your relationship? Have you ever walked over there and sat down and talked to them and tried to find some common ground so that you can work together on solving this problem? So to me, the relationship piece is very important. And working in a high risk environment, we really strive to come from a position of care, right? And create a culture of care where, we care about your livelihood. We care about your results. We care about everybody going home safely at the end of the night and going home to your family, being able to pay your mortgage, all these things. And I think sometimes, in some of these higher leadership positions, you hesitate to communicate because it's just so hard. And then you hide behind the fact that you're so busy and you've got all these, high level concerns and worries, but really the best thing that you can do is just get out there, talk to people, try to strengthen your relationship, even in a hard situation, because really that's when you need it the most, right?
Right.
If you act consistently and, with integrity throughout your career, and you're kind of filling the bucket, right? And you're filling the bucket, and at some point you're going to have to make a hard decision, and you're going to have to dip from the bucket, right? You're going to have to start emptying some of this goodwill and this leadership capital that you've built by, hopefully doing it well with integrity. And when that time comes, hopefully you've done a good job, and people will understand.
And I think that that's a key point there, right? Like, if you've been doing the work all the time, if you've been building relationships with your people, if you have been going around meeting them and talking to them, when the time comes for you to make a tough decision, or you have to communicate something, the folks may have already built up a certain level of trust with you. So it's like they're at least willing to hear you out. They're willing to hear your perspective versus kind of just being in an uproar. Whereas I think what you were alluding to earlier, you have a lot of the CEOs and higher level executives like, well, we've got, executive problems to worry about, so we don't really have time for the other concerns. Meanwhile, they should have been building that capital for when the tough times come. We have a question here. Let me go ahead and put it on the screen. We have a question from Todd. How much balance should be put into handling the situation at hand and putting out fires versus investing how it got to that point and rectifying the root causes to prevent recurrence? Ooh, that's a good one for you, Sean.
That's a good question. That's a smart guy right there.
Thank you, Todd.
Well, firefighting versus root causes. How big is the fire, right? How urgent is this thing? I think we all get caught in the urgency trap. And a lot of times what I find is when you start to dig in and you dig down to the root of a problem, all problems eventually at some point are people problems, and all solutions at some point are always people solutions. And I find that most people, when it comes to a problem, there's one of two root causes, and that's competence and capacity, right? Either the person that you got in is struggling with getting this thing done, or they don't have the capacity. And I think in modern business, or certainly in our industry, we push up on the capacity piece all the time, right? The work comes in fast, it comes in last minute. We do the best to scramble around and get it all taken care of, right? Provide a fast response. And then ultimately, you create a second set of problems, the law of unintended consequences, right? Now you're throwing bodies at it and trying to get it all done and hope the whole thing stays together. So it's certainly an issue, and it's a difficult question to answer, really. But I think if you're if you're able to detach from the situation in a leadership position, and look, everybody's a leader at every level. And I don't want
Yes.
to, I don't want to be here thinking that all this stuff comes from the top down. It comes in all directions. And really, what is leadership? Leadership is the ability to influence people towards a common goal, right? In a common direction. And that influence can show up in every direction. You can influence people down, and obviously if you have a little bit more authority, that becomes easier, but you can also influence people up, which in large part starts with allowing other people to influence you. So to Todd's question, to find that balance, you have to have some people that are able to zoom out and maybe consider the bigger picture, or see a little bit more to kind of make that determination about what we're going to focus on right now. So yeah, I hope that answers it. Probably just created more questions than I answered there, but
No, I think you made a good point in terms of typically when you dig to the root of many problems in organizations, it's typically a people problem. And one of the things I also just wanted to add for Todd is not everything that's urgent is important, right? And so when you're thinking about putting out the fires, it's like, what happens if this fire burns a little bit, right? Just because it's urgent, does this truly mean that it's important and it's integral to what we do, or is it just something that's happening and it's on fire right now? And if we let it burn a little bit, nothing truly happens. What I saw in my corporate career is that something was always on fire, but I worked in finance, and no tea or shade to my finance listeners, but you see things from a different perspective when you work in operations and someone's life is at risk versus like, oh, this thing is wrong on the PowerPoint, right? Like you look at the difference in, okay, this is urgent, but is this truly important and does it move the needle? And so to your question, Todd, if you're thinking about, hey, if this is not really an urgent issue, it's just a fire, it may still be worthwhile to put the effort into understanding the root cause versus saying, hey, I've just got to focus on this fire right now. It may not even be an important problem, even though it's urgent. So thank you for that great question, Todd. And
just
so
to add to,
yes, please.
What's important to one person isn't always important to another person. But
That's right.
but I think when those things get highlighted, at a minimum, there's an obligation to explain why we're not doing something like this, right? Like if this thing is on fire for you, but if you look at the bigger picture, that's a trash can fire, but the rest of the building is burning, then you need to prioritize, right? And
Right.
prioritization in any organization with humans who have limited capacity ultimately is an exercise in choosing what not to do most of the time and focusing on one thing at a time. Have a relentless focus on finishing so you can do this, so you can move on to the next thing. And having us, we work in these safety critical environments. Sometimes that's where the hard decisions are, is just what not to do, or what we're gonna, cutting off the hand to save the body, that kind of thing.
And I just want to piggyback on that a little bit more, because that's such an important point to say, because for one person, this thing is on fire and they are stressed out, right?
Yeah.
It's like, man, the sky is falling, Chicken Little, right? The sky is falling. But if they took a step back, and that's sometimes where the courage comes in, right? There may be another leader who is also senior, and they're feeling like, hey, we have to action this now or else. But if you are able to show the courage of, hey, Sean, let's take a step back. I know this seems like it's urgent, but let's take a step back and think about, for the entire organization, how big of an issue is this? Is it, if we handled it next week or next month, does it really change anything? And that does also take a certain level of courage. So and thank you for the feedback in the chat there as well. So let's get to the last couple questions so that I can let you get back to your awesome hotel room there, Sean. So thinking about Lisa again, how can she balance operational demands with safety and sustainability? And we've talked a little bit about this already, but in that kind of a position, right, you have a lot of things you need to do to keep the operations running. but you have a commitment to keeping your people safe, to the safety regulations, OSHA and whoever else. And so how do you make sure that you balance those demands and then, continue to show courage?
Yeah, I mean the whole thing is a massive project in this case study. We did a job last year, and we sent some guys out to look at this FPSO, right?
Mhm.
It's a big boat. It stores oil in the belly, and they got out there, and this thing was in such rough shape that they had entire sections of deck cordoned off because people would fall through.
Oh
It
my
had
God.
essentially had no maintenance for years and years and years, and now the back was starting to break and she was starting to sink, right? And so we went out there and we did this job and had some great people on this job, to try to balance this kind of safety versus operations. And this thing was still operational during this time, and they went through the shutdown period and eventually towed it away and sent it for scrap, and it all took many months. But ultimately they got backed into a corner with this thing, right? They never did the maintenance. They had all these problems. They had all kinds of write-ups on the thing and just problem after problem. And it was to the point where they were meeting with the regulators daily to get one more day extension at a time, or one more day extension at a time, and ultimately expending all kinds of time and resources and manpower when, if for the last 30 years they had done a little bit of chipping and a little bit of painting and put a little bit more money into the maintenance, they probably could have got more time out of this incredibly valuable asset. So it's we're a very bottom line driven industry, and you see that all the time. But having the foresight to look at the big picture and to push out a little bit further, maybe take a little less profits or make a little bit more investment in the longevity of this thing. It's just like you and me, you wake up and you go to the gym and you try to eat healthy and you do some of these things so you can keep going into the future, because eventually it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah, and I love that idea of doing the incremental piece, right? Is like if you're doing the small things, right? So going back to the gym example, right? You can pay $100 for the gym membership, or you can pay $10,000 to the doctor later because you haven't kept yourself in shape. So for those of you who are listening, who are in those senior level roles where especially if you're in operations or some of these places where you're trying to figure out, how do I make sure that I keep my units running, keep my ships running, what have you, especially if you're in manufacturing or anything like that, and you're trying to also keep your people safe, you have to think about, if I do a little bit and I take a little bit less now, how much can I save in the long run? And then how much more profit can I generate? As I mentioned, when we were in the green room, Sean, is that, my background, I did spend some time in operations and being at the plant. And that was some of the things that came up is, when do we take these units down for cleaning? When do we take these units down for maintenance? And the manufacturing staff had to think about that of like, okay, we take it down now, but how many more units can we get later if we do the upgrades now, if we do the maintenance now? So it's really about looking at the big picture and not just being so tactical and kind of right here and now focus. It's also thinking about the future. And so with the last question or last couple of questions here, I want to ask you, Sean, as we're coming to a close. And so for folks who are listening, I hope that you've been taking some great notes. And if you've got some more questions for Sean, now's the time to get them in, because we're starting to land this plane here. So what kind of leadership?
On the wheels, not on the roof.
Oh, right, on the wheels. Let's line that out for those who are listening.
Speaking of safety critical industries.
Right. But what would you say are leadership principles that help executives make courageous decisions under pressure? So kind of encompassing everything we've talked about, are there any sort of specific leadership principles you'd want to leave with listeners as to how executives and other senior leaders can make courageous decisions under pressure?
I do have a set of principles, and it's borrowed from it's the 5 principles of human performance, and this comes out of human and organizational performance theory and high reliability organizations. Okay, it comes out of the nuclear industry. It comes out of these safety critical industries. But what I've found over the years, since I started to dig into this, is that they really apply in every industry where you're looking to drive high reliability. And ultimately, in any type of business, be it B2B or B2C, people are looking for reliability. Reliability of delivery is number one. It's reliability before price. It's reliability before everything. And so the principles, blame fixes nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you have a problem, it doesn't do you a lot of good to blame anybody, because humans are fallible. Humans are going to make mistakes, right? Mistakes happen. You can spend some time, doing the blame, name, shame, and retrain whole thing. But at the end of the day, any time that you spend on in kind of that blame cycle is time wasted. It's time that's taking you away from actually solving the problem. And ultimately, leadership is about solving problems, right? We solve problems all day long. That's really all it comes down to. So then you can start digging into, kind of to Todd's point, looking for the root cause to prevent reoccurrence. Why did this thing happen? Well, context influences behavior. The context of the situation that you find yourself in influences behavior. So you need to embrace a learning mindset, right? And then, because when you can discover the context and you start to look at the bigger system and you start to learn why this thing happened, now you can make some kind of change.
Yeah.
And this is actually the hardest part to the whole cycle, because it's very easy to do your root cause analysis or to raise your nonconformities and, to do your investigation and figure out what went wrong in this whole thing, and then never make a change, right? Never rectify that root cause to prevent an occurrence. And it can be difficult because you're always prioritizing all these different things that happen, and ultimately priorities shift on the fly. Some weeks you think you've got all the time in the world to work towards this one goal, this one small project that rectifies something or improves your system, and then the next thing you know, your biggest client calls and says, I need 10 guys in the field tomorrow, and you drop everything to put out that fire, because ultimately that's what pays the bills.
Right.
So yeah, these are the principles I try to manage by, and ultimately you use them to drive high reliability, right?
I love that. I love that. And I want to just go back to that very first one where you said blame fixes nothing. So for the executives who are listening, senior leaders, managers, supervisors, blame fixes nothing. I've seen environments where you derail a conversation or derail a solution to a problem because we're spending so much time trying to point the finger at, like, well, whose fault is this? And at a certain point, it's like, well, does it matter now? At this stage, we need to fix the problem. We need to get whatever it is to the client. We need to, we have to solve the issue. And I think sometimes people use the root cause analysis mindset to say, oh, well, we're getting to the root cause. That's why we have to figure out, is it Sean that did it or is it Julia that did it? And it's like, root cause and blame are two different things. You can
I call it the root cause fallacy, because
Ooh.
Ultimately, when you look at these things, you look at like NTSB reports or incident investigation reports, there's always a human factor, but quite often the root cause is the action taken by this individual, and kind of by proxy, it's the individual that receives the blame for doing this thing. Well, they weren't following the procedure. And then but you have to look at, because the context of the situation influences the procedure, or influences the behavior that people take. Maybe maybe the communication overhead at the time, it had gotten so high, and they were more worried about doing the paperwork that was required by all these different procedures, that they weren't actually watching their core job that they were supposed to do. And this was all a systemic issue, and many of these things always happen a lot further back than when those last couple of slices of Swiss cheese line up right at the front line, and the mistake actually happens, which undoubtedly, people play a role in. But did they go to work to make a bad decision, or did they go to work to do the best that they could and try to get this thing done, right? And I think if you start from that place, you're going to get better outcomes over the long haul.
Absolutely. I love that. I think about when I do leadership trainings, that's one of the things that comes out is when employees make mistakes, like how do you respond? That's a measure of your leadership as well. It's not just do you have the title, are you getting the paycheck, and do you have the big team? When you have this team and you have people who've made mistakes or they haven't met your expectations, how do you respond? That's a measure of your effectiveness as a leader. It's not just whether or not your team gets results, it's how do you respond when they're not getting them.
Well, and I had told you four of the principles. I didn't get to the fifth one.
Oh, give me the fifth one. We need the fifth one, Sean. We need the fifth one.
How leadership responds matters. That is the fifth
Mm,
one. So you landed directly on it, right?
look at
And
me.
and this comes down to the relationships that you build, the relationship capital that you put into your people by investing your time in the individuals, in a relationship or a coaching or a mentoring aspect, but also like upholding group unity, kind of the one to many communication, and ensuring that the way that you respond aligns with the culture that you're trying to build, and the things that you say you value. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you say or what you write down, you know, and stick on the wall as your values if your actions consistently derail that, right? Or consistently contradict what you're saying.
Actions speak a whole lot louder than words for sure. And someone's giving you kudos here, Sean. So we've got Javon who says Sean is a great boss. He listens, digests the topic, and gives a fair response. That's respectful. So you're getting some kudos here, Sean.
Javon is my main man down in Trinidad. It's great to see you on here, Javon. Thank you.
That's awesome. And so as we're gonna wrap up here, are there any final words, Sean? You've given us so many nuggets over the past 40 minutes. Just any final words for the executives, leaders, or even individual contributors who are leading from where they are. Any final words for them about
It,
courage?
Everybody leads from where they are, and it takes courage to speak up, and to speak up and down the chain, right? There's if you're working with the right people and you build the right kind of environment, that type of communication should be easy. It should be accessible. You need to make it direct. Make sure you consider how your messaging comes across, and then ultimately, it's really just all about consistency, right? Which is why I believe having a principled approach, or taking a principled approach, which means actually sitting down and figuring out what your principles are, is so important. Because once you internalize those, once you internalize an idea that how leadership responds matters, or how people respond, how you respond matters, right? Do you yell at your kids when they don't do their homework, or do you come with a little bit of empathy and try to figure out what's going on? And by having these principles, it already tells you what to do in these hard situations, right? I accept that mistakes are going to happen, and I accept that blame fixes nothing. And so when a mistake happens and I'm frustrated, because you still get frustrated,
Mhm.
but you can put it through that filter. You know exactly how to respond if you're going to be consistent with these principles that you say that you uphold, right? And then the last thing about it is share your principles. Let people know, because that lets them know what to expect. I think it lets them understand you a little bit better, and kind of how to approach you on some of these things. And then you know, it drives these expectations about how you're going to react in a hard situation, which leads to consistency. And ultimately, people look for consistency in their leaders, because it's tumultuous. Business is tumultuous. People are getting laid off. All these different things are happening. You're trying to lay up 50 vessels, and nobody knows where their next paycheck's going to come from. And people need a rock in that, or an anchor, to anchor themselves in this, the tumultuous ocean that is modern day business.
And that's a mic drop for us tonight. Thinking about it for those who are listening, leadership, it's about consistency, and it's about sharing your principles. Your team is not filled with mind readers. If you've got expectations, if you've got principles, if you've got guidelines, share them with your team so that they can meet so they can meet those expectations, and then they know what they're being measured against if a mistake happens or an issue happens. And so with that, I want to say thank you so much, Sean, for joining us tonight and spending 44 minutes with us. I'm sure people are going to have questions and want to talk to you more about your experience. So how can people get in touch with you?
I'm very easy to find online. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Threads. You can go to my LinkedIn profile. I've got my cell phone posted there, which doesn't always work for me, but I accept calls all day long from all kinds of unknown numbers. I'm happy to talk about it. Yeah, all day. So yeah,
Awesome.
find me wherever you find people online, and I'll be there.
Awesome. And so thank you again, Sean. Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen and spend your evening with us. We hope that you found this conversation helpful. You were able to take some notes, some things to take back to your organization and your teams. We'll be back next week with another guest, same time, same place. If you want to keep up with me, you can connect with me here on LinkedIn, or you can sign up for my email list, rockcareer.com/email. And thank you again for watching, and I will see you all next week. Thanks for everyone who joined: Todd, Javon, Deborah, Manoj. Thank you guys for joining and chiming in the chat, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.